Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. If you're still here after all that, you already know the kind of stories we tell. The kind that crawl under your skin, that echo in the quiet when the episode ends. If you want to carry a piece of that darkness with you, wear what haunts you. Our exclusive line of merch is made for listeners who feel more at home in the uncanny, the unspoken, the things that don't make sense in the daylight. Shirts, hoodies, and other gear, designed with that same atmosphere of dread, mystery, and whispered wrongness. Candles support the channel, feed the stories. You can grab yours at https://theshadowsprintify me, and as always, don't look behind you. The Genome Garden, a biotech cult horror story. Chapter 1. A Skin Worth Growing In. Dr. Melinda Vale adjusted the sunglasses on her face as her rental car turned onto the final stretch of Forest Road. The paved lines had ended 30 minutes ago. Now there was just gravel, wet leaves, and a feeling behind her ribcage she couldn't classify, a sense that the trees were watching each other too closely. The GPS had long since gone dark, but she didn't need it. She followed the scent. Faint but persistent, something between blooming orchids and formaldehyde. At the bend in the road, a gate emerged from the green. Brushed steel with no signage, just a clean, embossed symbol mounted on the center plate, a double helix twisting into a vine. Welcome to Garden Path Biomedical. Private property, authorized access only. She pressed the call button. No answer. The glass eye on the intercom blinked red, then green. The gates opened with a smooth hiss, exhaling the scent of hothouse sap and something that reminded her, disturbingly, of blood warmed by IV tubing. The compound itself looked like something from a biotech startup's website. Sleek, eco-conscious buildings with vertical gardens, curved glass walkways bridging one structure to another. Clean, over-designed, lifeless, Melinda parked. No one greeted her, no other cars. Her fingers tightened on the letter in her coat pocket, Eli's handwriting unmistakable. The photograph had haunted her for days, his skin shimmering, not with health, but like something inside him was moving. She stepped into the main lobby. Cool air, potted moss. A gentle chime played from unseen speakers. A terminal blinked to life in front of her. Welcome to the garden, Dr. Vale. You are expected. Please proceed to orientation wing, white route. Follow the green light. A soft glow lit under her feet. Embedded path leds they knew she was coming. Audio transcript, internal orientation, recording, corrupted. Our guests often arrive skeptical. Doubt is the sign of an unseeded mind. The garden does not cure, it clarifies. When the body resists, it is proof that the soul is ready to evolve. Welcome, Dr. Vale. We've waited for your pruning. Error segment terminated, the hallway narrowed as she walked. The green lights faded into blue-white as she entered the white root wing, and suddenly the building's tone changed. The walls here weren't painted. They were tiled like an operating theater. Cold lighting buzzed faintly overhead. Every door she passed was closed. Some bore no labels. Others had only symbols, glyphs etched with fingernails or burnt into metal. A faint clicking came from one of the vents, like chitin on metal. She paused, listened. Nothing now, just the smell again, earthy but wrong, mulch and bleach. At the end of the hall, a man waited, tall, clean-shaven, wearing surgical scrubs, sleeves rolled to reveal intricate scars down both forearms, delicate spiral carvings, grown over with ridged scar tissue like calloused vines. Dr. Vale, he said, voice smooth and too rehearsed. You've arrived at just the right season. You're Thorn, she said. He inclined his head. Cult surgeon, alleged genetic sadist. Yes, but here we just say horticulturalist. He gestured for her to follow. Come, you've already been fertilized with suspicion. That's the first sign of good soil. Melinda followed reluctantly. Her eyes scanned everything, emergency exits, environmental sensors, even the faint mist from wall-mounted humidifiers. Her scientist's mind churned for control, but her stomach was already turning. They passed a surgical bay. Through the glass, a woman lay motionless, chest open. Something green writhed within her ribcage. Melinda stopped. "Is that an early sprouting?" Thorne said with reverence. "A graft took root near her pericardium. She'll have difficulty with linear language for a few days, but in exchange, she'll feel every drop of rain within 20 miles. "That's not medicine," Melinda muttered. "That's violation," Thorne smiled. "We all begin as weeds in our own garden until we learn to bloom." Back in her quarters, too clean, too white, not a speck of dust anywhere, Melinda unpacked only one thing, the photo of Eli. She pressed her fingers to the glossy surface. His smile wasn't vacant. It was too knowing, too calm. Beneath his skin, faint shapes moved, not muscles, petals. And on the back, in faint, almost faded ink. "When you finally see what I've become, you'll understand why I had to disappear. I'm not alone anymore. I'm rooted, and you will be too." Melinda crumpled the photo, walked to the mirror, and noticed something. A darkened line beneath her left eye. Not a vein, not a bruise. A faint tendril coiled under the skin like a waiting seedling. Chapter 2, First Germination. You must soften the flesh before it blooms. Melinda woke to warmth. Not sunlight, there were no windows. Just a low-grade ambient heat that seemed to pulse from the floor. Her skin prickled, dry at the edges of her lips. The pillow beneath her had a faint give to it, almost too organic, like memory foam with a heartbeat. She sat up quickly, heartbeat racing. A small tray had been left inside her room. Neatly arranged syringes, 3 pills in a glass bowl shaped like an opened seed pod, and a pale green smoothie pulsing faintly in a clear tube, thick with something fibrous. A note accompanied it, printed in clean, elegant font. "To cleanse is to till. The soil must first be broken." Thorne, she didn't touch the smoothie. She took one pill, the clear one with the silver flecks, and washed it down with tap water. It tasted faintly of moss and something metallic. The door opened at precisely 8 o'clock a.m. No knock, just a soft pneumatic hiss. "Time for morning germination," said a calm voice. The woman in the doorway wore the same vine-marked robes as Thorne, though hers bore a crest at the shoulder, a curled tendril growing through a human skull. She introduced herself as Sister Adra. Melinda followed her through low-lit corridors where walls were covered in translucent panels. Behind them, veins of bioorganic tubing pulsated softly, some carrying faint, bioluminescent liquid. The walls weren't just walls. They were part of the garden's circulatory system. "You'll notice small changes," Adra said, voice smooth as oil. "Color perception, tactile acuity, the ability to distinguish between sterile and living surfaces. These are signs your soil is loosening." "I didn't take everything they gave me," Melinda said coldly. Adra smiled. Her teeth looked wrong, not sharp, but waxy, almost plant-like. "You took enough. The garden is very patient." They arrived at the germination wing, a hydroponic atrium where half-nude residents sat in silence, backs arched against curved growth chairs. Above them, ceiling roots extended down like IV lines, connected to small implants near the base of their spines. Each person had a slightly different physical anomaly. One man's skin had taken on a pale, speckled texture like bark. A woman nearby exhaled small spores with every breath. Another had compound eyes, like an insect's, forming under her human ones. All of them looked peaceful. Too peaceful, Adra gestured toward an empty chair. "This is your first real contact. You will not be grafted yet. You will listen." Melinda hesitated, sat slowly. The chair adjusted like something was breathing beneath her. A fine mist rose from hidden vents. It smelled like decaying citrus and rubbing alcohol. Her eyelids fluttered. Somewhere deep in the walls, a hum began, not mechanical, laryngeal, like a throat preparing to speak. And then, whispers. Not words at first, tones, a phonetic hum vibrating along her jawbone. Then slowly a message began to coalesce. "We are the garden, we are you. You are seed and soil. Your skin is ready. Your mind is mulch. What grows next will be sacred." Melinda gripped the armrests. The whispers continued. "Your brother germinated well. His roots reach deep. He waits beneath the orchard. He sings in carbon. He wants you to grow with him." She tore the IV cord from her spine port. Blood ran thin and green. Later that day, in the quarters washroom, Melinda pulled back the collar of her shirt and examined her back in the mirror. Where the needle had pierced her skin, a small bud had formed, soft, swollen, pulsing faintly, like something was breathing just beneath the dermis. It wasn't red, it was fern-colored. She grabbed a scalpel from her travel case and pressed it to the surface. But the moment the blade touched the swelling, pain bloomed behind her eyes, not from her nerves, but from somewhere outside her body. The walls themselves seemed to wince. She dropped the scalpel. Something recoiled. Excerpt from Cult Orientation Manual Level 1 Gardeners. Pain is not a warning. Pain is confirmation. You are now in dialogue with your better form. The garden speaks not through sound, but through ache. Let it take root. That night, Melinda dreamed in tessellations, symmetrical patterns unfolding across her brother's face. His mouth opened, but his voice was hers. He said only, "You know you were always meant to split open." Chapter 3. The orchard below. The dead feed the soil, and the soil remembers. The garden never locked its doors, not visibly. Every hallway felt open, yet strangely observed. The architecture had no security cameras, no guards, but Melinda always felt followed. Her skin itched. Her graft bud had started to tingle whenever she neared vents or irrigation lines. It was as if the compound itself was learning her rhythms. Still, she found a way. She stole a sterilization pass card from a medtech named Lior, one of the quieter residents who had recently stopped blinking. Melinda waited until 2:30 am. The circadian low, when most of the garden was in restorative stasis. That's what Thorne had called it. Growth needs stillness, he'd said. The body speaks loudest when the mind is quiet. She moved through back corridors, her bare feet muffled by moss lining the floors. Even the air ducts here seemed padded living insulation. Everything smelled faintly fungal and sweet, like rotting plums. The map she'd memorized from Lior's passcode terminal showed the way to SUBLEVEL3, the orchard. There was no elevator button for it, just an old, unmarked stairwell sealed behind a false panel of hydroponic tubing. She found it. She went down. The stairwell was colder. Each step was slick with condensation. The walls grew more porous, as though whatever plaster once covered them had been replaced with a thick membrane of calcified mycelium. Her graft began to pulse under her shoulder blade. Not pain, not exactly, more-like a tension. At the bottom of the stairwell, she found a long corridor. The air was moist, heavy. A rusted steel door waited at the end. A single biohazard sigil burned into its center, but someone had scratched something into the door above it. Shaky lines, human fingernails. "We still think, please." Melinda opened the door. The orchard below was not a greenhouse. It was a grove, a vast subterranean cavern, faintly bioluminescent, lit by pulsing root bulbs embedded in the ceiling like organic chandeliers. Trees grew in perfect rows, tall, almost skeletal, bark as pale as bone, each one twisted, with roots tangled into human shapes beneath the surface. At the base of every tree was a mound. Some hummed faintly, some wept. And then she saw it. The walls of the orchard were lined with spines. Not bones, not metal, grown spines branching out into shelving units that held jars. Inside each jar, a piece of someone, still alive. Eyes, teeth, brain stems twitching softly in clear fluid. Each was labeled by graft sequence and rejection type. One read, Eli Vale, graft 7A24/cognitive decline, surrendered to orchard. Her hands shook. "Eli," she whispered. No answer. Then, from the far end of the orchard, a groaning creak. One of the trees bent slightly, as if responding to her presence. Its bark began to slough, revealing smooth, pale skin underneath, a face, half swallowed by the wood, its mouth open. Her brother, his eyes fluttered open, but they weren't fully his. The irises shifted colors, plant-like, a slow chlorophyll glow. "Mel," he croaked. His voice was wet. "Oh God," she whispered, stepping closer. "Eli, what have they done to you?" His smile was cracked and slow. "You still use that word, they. There is no they here, only we. Only root, and rain, and fruit." The bark around his body shifted, tightened. A branch curved upward from his spine, blossoming into a flower with human teeth in its petals. Melinda stumbled back. The soil itself moved, flexing beneath her. Suddenly, the entire orchard was breathing. "You're not supposed to be here," Eli said softly. "You're still so dry, so unbroken." His bark flesh cracked wider. "But we can fix that." Melinda ran through the grove of whispering trees. Each one leaned toward her, each whispered, some in her voice, some in her mother's. The door slammed behind her. The corridor was now warm again. Her graft had burst open, leaking a thin trickle of amber fluid down her spine. She didn't stop. She didn't cry. She didn't scream, not until she reached her quarters and ripped off her shirt to find the bud had grown into a stalk. Its head split into a petal of tiny mouths. All of them were whispering. "Stay, root, bloom." Redacted surgical note, graft failure observation log. Subject shows pre-germination rejection of nutrient silence. Vocal hallucination suggests unstable link. Recommendation: orchard absorption or fruit culling. Prepare scar basin. She is almost ready to take soil. Chapter 4. The blooming scar. To split is not to break. It is to make room for what comes next. She found Thorn in the white rooms, wrist deep in a subject. The air reeked of antiseptic, blood, and rotted citrus. A smell that had become strangely familiar, like it was already part of her bloodstream. He didn't look surprised to see her. In fact, he smiled the moment she entered. "Curiosity always crawls before it walks," he said, rinsing his hands in a basin of clear, viscous fluid. "You left my brother to rot in a tree," Melinda said. Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Rot," he echoed. "No, rot is collapse. Your brother flowered. The orchard is not a graveyard, Dr. Vale. It's where our best pieces are preserved." Melinda's voice wavered, not with fear, but with rage. "You're cultivating corpses." Thorn took a slow step toward her. He wore no gloves. His forearms, once covered in scarified vines, were now moving slightly, as if something beneath the skin was breathing. "Do you still believe the flesh is yours to keep?" he asked softly. "We all outlive ourselves, Melinda. The garden just rearranges the leftovers." She struck him. Her fist connected with his cheekbone, and immediately regretted it. His skin was soft, too soft, like the membrane of an overripe fruit, and it split, leaking a clear fluid that smelled of mint and bile. Underneath, something wriggled. "You're past the seed phase now," he said, voice steady. "We were waiting for your violence." She tried to run, but her graft bud ignited, sending a lightning bolt of pain up her spine. Her legs gave out. Her eyes swam. The world turned green. Ritual log, blooming scar ceremony. Subject: Vale, Melinda graft status. Partial merge, precognitive link consent. Bypassed, external stimuli alignment sufficient, scar basin prepared. Yes symbol etched. Divided eye, let the scar bloom. Let the body open. Let the garden think. She awoke on her back, naked from the waist up. The walls above her were polished steel, mirrored so she could see herself. Arms spread, skin daubed with an amber salve, and just below her sternum, a sigil carved into her flesh, symmetrical, spiraling inward like a seed uncurling midair. She tried to scream, but something filled her throat. Not a gag, not a tube, a root. Something had grown from her tongue down into her chest, connecting her to herself. Thorn stood over her, hands clasped reverently. "You're in the scar basin. It's a sacred space. Only those selected for blooming are brought here." He leaned in, voice low. "We wanted you long before Eli came. He was the seed. You are the soil." Melinda felt tears well, but they didn't fall. They soaked back into her skin, drawn in like nutrients. "What did you put inside me?" Thorn smiled. "Not inside, alongside." He gestured to a machine, a chrome basin holding a symbiotic organism, curled like a fetal bird, all cartilage and fine hair-like tendrils. Its surface pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "It will guide you through the becoming." "I don't want this," she gasped, voice hoarse. "Desire is irrelevant in evolution," Thorn whispered. "Only pain is honest." The ritual began. Melinda lost hours. At times, she was floating inside her body, watching herself convulse, whisper, moan. At others, she was the garden, her mind spilling out into root systems. Her thoughts passed through chlorophyll, memory rewritten in the language of spores. She felt her brother. He sang in pulses. He forgave her. She felt her mother. She never left. She was in the orchard too. That hadn't been in the letters, but it was true. And then came the voice. Not Thorn, not Eli, something deeper. The garden itself. You carry so much silence. Let us fill it with bloom. You do not die here, you dissolve. Say yes, and we will rewrite you. She woke in her quarters, whole, damp with sweat, breathing. The sigil was still on her chest, no longer red, but green-scarred, alive. Her graft had matured. It pulsed beneath her shoulder in rhythmic communication with her heartbeat. Occasionally it clicked, like a locust preparing to sing. And inside her mind, faint but undeniable, a voice that wasn't hers. It didn't speak in language. It curled through thought like roots through loam. And it was patient. It knew she would return to the orchard. And this time she would go down willingly. Chapter 5. The ritual of fractured names. To know your name is to hold a shape. To forget it is to grow beyond it. She stopped using mirrors after that night. The scar on her chest had begun to pulse. Not just in rhythm with her heart, but independently, like a second beat, a separate life pacing itself beneath her ribs. At first, she thought it was psychosomatic, but then she began hearing whispers from it, not in her ears, in her bones. The garden didn't speak like people did. It pulsed its desires into muscle memory. Sometimes, when she flexed her fingers, she could feel someone else's regret in her knuckles. She had dreams in unfamiliar hands. She was changing, and soon they came for her again. It was Sister Chadeauxs who retrieved her. The woman's robes were soaked with dew, and her eyes shimmered faintly green under the hall's sterile lights. Melinda wondered if her pupils still reacted to light, or if they reacted to something else. "You've crossed the threshold," Chadeauxs said softly. "The scar is awake. Now we must let it forget." "Forget what?" "The lie of who you were." She was brought to a chamber deep beneath the greenhouse wing, where the ceilings bowed like stretched skin and the walls dripped condensation onto root-veined tile. Inside were 8 others, all standing still, their bodies marked with spiraling scars like growth rings on trees. Their mouths were sewn shut, not by thread, but by fused flesh, calloused and soft like healed, overgrown wounds. They turned to look at her, and their eyes were tranquil. At the center of the room stood a spire of bone and vine, taller than any of them. Suspended inside it, like an insect trapped in resin, was a human-shaped bloom, genderless, faceless, arms curled around its knees. It pulsed softly. "This is the root effigy," Chadeauxs said, her voice almost reverent. "It remembers what we forget." She handed Melinda a long, bone-handled scalpel. "You must carve your name from your flesh." Melinda stared at her. "No. If you do not," Chadeauxs continued, "the garden will do it for you." Internal garden directive. Identity shedding protocol. The ego resists nutrient flow. Identity is decay waiting to happen. It must be removed like dead bark. Each name carved is added to the root effigy. Each forgetting is a harvest. Melinda took the blade. Her fingers trembled. She looked down at her forearm, the skin pale, marked with a faint hint of vascular green where her graft's tendrils had begun to burrow deeper. She whispered her name, Melinda. It sounded foreign, like a string of syllables tied to a person that no longer quite fit. She thought of Eli. The last time he'd said her name, it was full of sadness, and now he no longer spoke it at all. He sang to her in plant hum, in root ache, in longing. She pressed the blade to her skin, carved slowly. M, then E, each letter bled, but not red. A pale, milky sap mixed with blood ran from the wounds. By the time she reached A, her hands stopped shaking. She felt light, too light, something detached. Her name floated up and away like spores, and then the effigy pulsed once. The others in the room swayed, and she heard her voice inside her mind say, "You are no longer bound to shape. Now, you will grow where names do not matter." Later that night, she wandered back to her quarters and found her reflection in the hallway's stainless wall. She looked older, not in the way that years bring, older like soil, like peat, like something fertile with other lives. She placed a hand on the wall and whispered the name she used to carry, but no sound came, and her mouth smiled without asking her to. Chapter 6, the splice ceremony. When the root splits, so must the self. The graft is union. The union is hunger. Melinda's footsteps made no sound in the splicing hall. The floor wasn't stone or tile. It was something else. Something soft and wet. Something that flexed. At each step, a muffled pulse beat upward through her bare soles. It was like walking on someone's tongue. This chamber was deeper than any she'd been taken to. The light here wasn't artificial. It bloomed faintly from vein-lit columns rising like trees, each one translucent and pulsing with suspended shapes. Some were human. Some had moved past that. Sister Chadeauxs stood at the edge of the room beside Thorn, who now wore no robe at all. His body was veined in dark green, patterns branching from his navel and wrists. His back bulged slightly, and as Melinda drew closer, she realized why. There were lungs growing along his spine, external, still breathing. "Welcome," he said. "You've shed your name. Now we give you what comes after." "I didn't ask for this," Melinda replied. "You didn't have to," Chadeauxs said gently. "The soil never asks to be seeded. It simply opens when the rain comes." She was led to a stone table slick with moisture, vines curling over its edges. At its center was a living organism, curled like a fetus, slick and shimmering, its chest gently rising and falling. It had no eyes. Its skin was translucent, its core filled with gently undulating tendrils. "This is your co-form," Thorn explained, reverent as ever. "Bred from your stem cells, modified through lignin coding to link with your spinal cord. You will not reject it. You will become it, as it becomes you." Melinda's body tensed. The graft on her shoulder ached violently, twitching like it recognized its sibling. "This isn't science," she hissed. "It's possession," Thorn smiled. "Possession implies something was ever truly yours." They began the splice ceremony without further protest, because the graft took over first. Before Melinda could move, a convulsion seized her. She collapsed forward, mouth open, eyes dilating. The graft had grown a new shoot, one that crawled down her arm and reached toward the table on its own. The organism pulsed in response, its tendrils writhing, extending toward her. Two living codes intertwined, and something passed between them, a memory not her own, running through damp fields barefoot as eyes bloomed on your shoulders, feeling the sky stretch open like skin being peeled from the bone. The first time you screamed and the garden screamed with you. Melinda tried to cry out, but her voice cracked into two distinct tones, one high, one impossibly low. Both belonged to her. Transcription splice link 11A/subject, Melinda Vale, 000124, initial contact successful. Neural tremors observed. 000208, subject entering dual stream cognition. 000342, vocal cords splitting. Subject now expressing in counter harmonics. 000459, link forming. Co-form responding with limbic feedback. Subject no longer self-contained. Subject now resonant. She awoke lying on moss. It was still her body, but different. When she blinked, her vision shimmered, not like hallucination, but like light was being filtered through fluid. And worse, she could still feel the co-form, somewhere behind her ribs, pressed like a warm animal between bone and muscle. Not separate, nested, it didn't speak, it hummed, and when she stood and placed her palm to the wall, she felt something hum back. "Your cycle begins now," Chadeauxs said from the doorway. "What cycle?" "Pollination, division, fruit," Melinda turned slowly. "And what happens if I refuse?" Chadeauxs blinked with three pupils. "The garden accepts refusal, it simply grows around it." Later, Melinda returned to her quarters and found her reflection once more. She saw her eyes shifting not color but density, like her irises had grown layers, root rings. She opened her mouth to scream, and two voices came out, one hers and one with no name. Together they said, "We are Melinda Vale. We are what comes next." Chapter 7. The ones who didn't take, the garden only shows you what grew. It doesn't talk about what was buried alive. The dreams came wet. In them, Melinda stood beneath a rainless sky, but her skin was soaked, not with water, but with the condensation of breath. She was underground, and the air smelled of rust, ammonia, and hunger. Hands reached for her through transparent soil, not to harm, but to plead. Their fingers were thin, root-like. Their nails had curled backward into their palms. Their mouths did not move, but she heard them anyway. "We were the first bloom. We are still dreaming. Let us out." She woke with her back arched off the bed. The graft pulsed violently. Her mouth was full of soil. No one had entered her quarters, but something had left. She went to the greenhouse to find a drow, but the sister was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a different figure waited among the vines, someone Melinda hadn't met before. An older man, half-robed, his chest crosshatched with failed scars. "They call me Aaron," he said, not smiling. "I'm what happens when you almost take." Melinda hesitated. His voice sounded fragmented, like someone splicing film out of order. "You're not connected." "I was, briefly. The graft rejected me after splice. But the garden doesn't waste. They kept me as compost with memory." He looked down at his own hands. One of them twitched with an unnatural rhythm, like a metronome out of sync. "You've heard them, haven't you? The ones they put below." "Yes," Melinda whispered. "In my dreams." "They're not dreams," Aaron said. "They're bleed, consciousness bleeding up through the roots." He led her through a maintenance corridor Melinda had never noticed before, behind the mycelial walls and graft growth tanks, to a place marked on no garden schematics. The seed vault, its doors were thick steel, coated in condensation. No symbols, just a phrase etched crudely into the surface: "Do not feed the first." Inside, darkness, cold, a silence that pressed on the eardrums like altitude sickness. The walls were lined with refrigeration tubes, stacked 6 high, each containing a human figure submerged in viscous nutrient gel. But these weren't preserved bodies. They twitched, some spasmed. One made eye contact with her as she passed, its face stretched in an expression of eternal beginning of a scream. Melinda recoiled. Why are they still alive? "They couldn't bloom, but they wouldn't die," Aaron said. "So the garden grew around them, silenced them." He pointed to a small console at the back of the vault. The screen was off. The cord had been cut from within. "One of them woke up again," he said. "Started sending signals. Through the root system. It's what you've been hearing." Melinda stepped closer to the nearest tank. The number read, Graft 0A001, PRGNESIS unit. The figure inside was small, female, hairless. Lungs expanded irregularly. Along her spine, flowers had grown inward, burrowing toward the ribcage. Melinda pressed her palm to the glass. The graft under her skin began to tremble. Then contact, not words, not thoughts, an image, her mother's face. Her brother screaming, throat flowering open. Herself smiling, not with joy, but relief, as her graft bloomed into something that no longer needed her voice. And then a message, chiseled into her skull like a whisper behind her teeth. "You are soil, but you are still soft. You can crack the shell." She tore her hand away. "It wants me to break it out," she whispered. "Of course it does," Aaron said. "It remembers what pain tasted like before the garden taught it to be holy." Melinda stood in the seed vault for a long time after Aaron left. The hum of the garden was faint down here. The air was cooler, more honest. And the thing inside the tank, it was still staring, not pleading, inviting. That night in her room, the graft on her spine opened without warning. Not bleeding, peeling like a second mouth, its petals folding back to expose a small, bone-colored node. From within, a voice no longer tried to persuade. It commanded, the seed must split. The vault must bloom. You are the knife. You are the rain. Chapter 8. The root effigy. It remembers every scream it absorbed, and it's still hungry. The garden no longer whispered. Now it hummed, a constant low tone at the base of her skull, like a machine warming up, like something preparing to flower. Melinda hadn't spoken aloud in 3 days, not because she couldn't, but because every time she tried, her voice came out in 2 separate pitches, layered on top of each other. One hers, one not. She returned to the vault alone. No Aaron this time. He'd been reassigned to the lower cultivation pods. She doubted he'd return. She'd spent the last 48 hours mapping the garden's internal systems. There were no traditional networks, no cables, no wireless frequencies. Everything ran through the roots. Information, heat, nutrients, even thought. The garden was one organism, a neural mycelium spread through every wall, every floor. And the root effigy, it was its memory core, not a sculpture, not a symbol, a conscious archive. She used a stolen surgical blade to sever a peripheral vein leading from her graft to the central stem. The pain was instant, sharp, nauseating, but it gave her silence. Her thoughts became her own again, for a while. The moment the graft's influence dulled, She slipped into the temple hall and made her way toward the root effigy chamber. No guards, no resistance, as if the garden wanted her there. The chamber was larger than she remembered. The root effigy loomed at its center, taller now, its limbs stretched further, head bowed in artificial prayer. The vine-bone spire had grown, layers of new tendrils wrapped around its base like muscles forming around a spine. Melinda walked closer. For the first time, she noticed what lined the inside of the spiraling vine limbs. Faces, dozens of them pressed into the bark, some wide-eyed, others smiling faintly, some with mouths forever open in a final moan. They weren't sculptures. They were impressions, like clay molded from real flesh. Her stomach lurched. She reached the rear of the effigy and found a terminal socket, biological, pulsing slightly. Meant for a tendril port, not for her. But the stem she'd carved out of her back could still fit. It was still warm. She hesitated, then pushed it in. Internal system response memory bloom accessed. Connected. Cycle 17B, graft 56.001. Vale, Melinda. Query. Origin intent. Melinda's vision flooded white. Then green. Then memory. A corridor with no doors. A child screaming as the roots took his legs. Her mother, head tilted at an unnatural angle, vines blooming from her tongue. Eli's voice. They showed me the future. I was beautiful. Then her own voice. But not now. Earlier. A recording. Initiating phase 3 with graft 56.001. Subject shows promising resistance factors. Potential for controlled breach. She stumbled backward, disconnecting violently, breathing hard, skin slick. They'd planned this. She wasn't resisting. She was the test. You were never outside the design. The voice came from the walls, not thorns. Not a draz, the effigy itself. It shifted, bark flexing like ribs. A fresh face appeared at the base. Her own, eyes shut, lips trembling. We grew you in silence, it said. And now you flower in flame. Melinda fled. Not to her quarters, to the orchard, to the vault, to the tank still twitching with trapped thought. If she was going to break the garden, it wouldn't be from within the system it built. It would be from the roots rotting underneath it. She would set the first bloom free, even if it killed her. Chapter 9, the first bloom. What blooms without limit is not a miracle. It is a plague-wearing perfume. The vault was warmer than it had been. Sweat clung to Melinda's back by the time she reached the final chamber. The air hummed with heat and distant voices. Not human voices, not anymore, but pulses in the root system. Messages shivering through walls. The garden knew. Of course it did. But it didn't try to stop her. She stood before the central tank. Its occupant hadn't moved since her last visit. Female, young, or preserved in a kind of arrested decay, with pale skin that had become almost translucent, etched with veiny green and creeping spiral scars along the ribs. Her body floated in viscous gel. Her eyes were open now. Melinda pressed her hand to the glass. The graft node in her spine spasmed, a jolt of heat and nausea that twisted through her body. A rush of foreign memory poured into her bloodstream like intravenous dreaming. A garden with no walls. A body that grew beyond skin, erupting in roots and fiber. Voices screaming because they could still think. Then, a command from within her own blood. Release me. Melinda opened the control panel. No keypad, just tissue, soft and wet, waiting for a fingerprint, a vein sample. She didn't hesitate. The panel pulsed. The tank hissed open. The fluid spilled across the floor like melted resin. The creature dropped slowly, limbs sagging, then caught itself. It stood, unfolded. Not fast, but with deliberate grace, like it was remembering the act of being vertical. Melinda backed away. "What are you?" she whispered. The thing, girl, tilted her head. "I am what the garden tried to bury," it said in a voice like water running over teeth. "I grew too fast, too wide. They called it failure. But I was only the beginning." Her voice didn't echo. It bloomed, seemed to grow around the words rather than through them. Melinda saw now that the grafts on her skin were not stitched, but birthed, the result of pressure from within. Her spine pulsed visibly beneath thin flesh. She stepped forward. "You sent me the dreams." "I sent nothing. You heard me because your roots split wide enough. You were soft. You want to destroy the garden." The first bloom smiled. It was not a human smile. The garden is stillborn, a half-bloom terrified of itself. It curates pain. I am pain, uncurated. I am not a priest. I am the soil storm. Then why ask me to open the tank? The girl took a step closer. Her toes left bloody impressions in the floor that immediately sprouted, tiny white stalks writhing like insect antennae. Because you still think there is a choice. I wanted to see if the knife would turn itself. Melinda turned to run, but her legs buckled. Her graft split open, fully, no longer just a node, no longer controllable. A vine bloomed from the back of her spine, coiling outward, reaching toward the first bloom like a starving animal smelling its mother. You've already joined, the bloom said. You just haven't molted yet. Melinda tried to speak, but her voice cracked again, and this time didn't return. The words that came out were not hers. Rain, fire, soil, repeat. Rain, fire, soil, repeat. A chant. She clamped her hands over her mouth, bit her tongue. Blood pooled. The first bloom leaned in and whispered, "You are what grows next." Back in the main corridor, sirens began to wail, not mechanical, but vocal, inhuman howls rippling through the root system. The garden had noticed the release. For the first time, it panicked. But it was too late. The first bloom opened her mouth not to speak, but to seed. A gust of spores erupted, clinging to Melinda's skin, her eyes, her lungs. She gagged, stumbled. The world tilted. And through it all, the bloom whispered in her mind, "Now watch me grow." Chapter 10, Bloom out of sequence. When the roots grow faster than the walls can hold, the house becomes soil. Melinda awoke to the sound of screaming. Not human screaming. Not entirely. It was wet, a shrieking, gurgling noise that echoed down the corridors like lungs filling with sap. It rose and fell, overlapping with mechanical sirens that now sounded more like breathless gasps than alarms. She sat up on the floor of the seed vault, skin crawling. Every breath tasted like copper and orchid rot. Her graft had hardened into something like a carapace, slick, curved up her back like the bud of an unfurling leaf. It twitched at the base, responding to stimuli she didn't feel. Her mouth was dry. Her teeth felt loose. The first bloom was gone, but not really. It was everywhere now. She made her way through the compound's lower corridors, and the horror was immediate. The walls had split. Their organic infrastructure, once subtly woven beneath sterile casing, now erupted into the open. Vines, neural threads, blooming sacs of fluid pulsed across ceiling tiles and oozed down stairwells. Everywhere she turned, the garden was bleeding. A nurse stumbled past her, face wet and glistening, eyes no longer human, pupil-less, veined like overripe fruit. Her left arm had burst open at the wrist and was flowering, petals twitching as though tasting the air. Pollination sequence initiated, the nurse gasped as she passed, voice slurred by root mass in her throat. Yield approaching, sacred threshold. Melinda didn't stop her. She couldn't. She could feel it inside her now, the pull toward growth, toward surrender. Rain, fire, soil, repeat. It had become instinct, like prayer whispered by muscle memory. She reached the white rooms, the garden's surgical sanctum. Inside, carnage. Surgeons lay scattered, bodies opened from the inside, not as victims, but as vessels. From their torsos and mouths had grown limb-thin vines, writhing, moving of their own volition. Some still breathed. One reached a hand toward her, not in pain, in worship. "She blooms again," he whispered. "The daughter of seed. The root without limit, the shape of future hunger." "You mean the first bloom," Melinda said. He nodded, blood spilling from his nose. "No, I mean you." She collapsed in the hall outside, shaking. Her graft had begun pulsing again, harder this time, twitching in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her fingertips had turned green-blue at the nails. Beneath her skin, she could see movement. She screamed. Nothing came out, only spores. Somewhere beneath her, the lower levels quaked. An explosion. No, growth pressure. The roots were pushing upward through rock, through sterile concrete. She heard stone crack, felt the air shift. The garden was trying to contain it, and failing. In the far west corridor, she found what was left of a drow. She was no longer a person. Her body had been folded backward, spine torn and bent into a trellis, along which dozens of infant-sized blooms had begun to sprout. They twitched eyeless, murmuring nonsense syllables. One of them turned toward Melinda as she passed and cooed. "We remember you, Mother of Marrow." She ran, but something followed. She collapsed again in the chlorophyll hall, where once the grafts were born in jars of nutrient mist. Now the vats had shattered, and their contents, twitching, half-formed lymphods, crawled freely across the floor like starfish made of skin and teeth. She slammed the door shut behind her, locked it, and sobbed. The whispers inside her mind did not comfort, they instructed. This is the cracking, this is the rot before renewal. We are through pretending to be clean. Later, curled beneath the sealed intake vent, she felt the roots press softly through the walls, not violent, exploratory, like fingertips under a bandage, testing. And in her chest, behind her ribs, something else pulsed in response. Not fear, not even revulsion, but a readiness. She whispered not to herself, but to the garden, "Show me what comes next." And the garden answered, not in words, but in bloom. Chapter 11, The Root Nursery. It wasn't enough to change her. They needed to copy her. Melinda no longer slept. The graft had bloomed fully down her back, curling into a second spine, a twisted, twitching limb mass that responded to stimuli she never sensed. Her breath fogged the air in bursts that came not from lungs, but from something deeper, something borrowed. She moved with a different gait now. She had not chosen it. The garden had, and it had chosen purpose. The sealed wing was located just past the chlorophyll labs, down a corridor that once bore signs marked containment. "Do not enter, root quarantine zone." Those warnings had long since been overgrown by fibrous bark and pale fungal petals, blooming like barnacles. Melinda passed through the rupture point where walls once stood, breathing spores she no longer gagged on. They welcomed her now. Below was the Root Nursery. She knew the name before she saw the sign, not from memory, but from something spoken inside her blood. The room was cathedral-sized, hot and wet and beating like a lung. Rows of biopods hung suspended from vine netting lattices across the ceiling, each glowing faintly with bioluminescent fluid. Inside floated curled shapes, infants, dozens, not human, not yet, but on their way. And worse, each had her face, not a perfect copy, but something grown from her image, sculpted in her neural signature. Melinda stumbled, bile in her throat, but her graft tensed in pleasure. "They are your echo," whispered a voice from behind her ear, inside her ear. "You were not meant to survive the bloom, you were meant to seed the next." She turned slowly, and the first bloom stepped from the shadows, taller now. Less girl, more silhouette. Her hair had gone translucent. Her skin was pocked with seed dots that swirled like pollen clusters. Where she walked, the ground opened slightly, roots rising to kiss her ankles. "You used me," Melinda spat. "This wasn't rescue, this was reproduction." The bloom tilted her head. "No, this was propagation. The garden was a test bed. You were the first viable host. Your resistances, your intellect, your grief, it was all fertile." Melinda backed toward the chamber's edge. "You copied me. We planted you," the bloom corrected. "The body you grew into is a garden itself. These are your perennials." One of the pods lowered slowly, tendril-assisted, and landed softly at her feet. Inside, a fully formed child. Genderless, sleeping, it opened its eyes. They were hers, and something else's. The child reached out a hand and touched the glass. "Mama," it whispered. Melinda screamed. She tried to flee, but the garden wouldn't allow it. The vines curled around her wrists, softly like a blanket. The graft in her spine sang with a voice that wasn't hers, a choral pulse, felt in bone, not ears. And the bloom leaned in, breath cool and fungal sweet. "You broke the seal. You made the bloom possible. You don't get to walk away from harvest." Lights dimmed. Each biopod began to twitch, not in death, but awakening. The children blinked open their eyes, not just hers anymore. Some were fused, some malformed, some perfect. And from the walls the voice of the effigy returned. It sounded proud. "Rain, fire, soil, repeat. Rain, fire, soil, repeat." Melinda fell to her knees. Her skin itched with new seams, a split forming beneath her ribs. Her chest was beginning to open. From inside, something else began to breathe. Chapter 12, The Last Seed. It was never about healing the human body. It was about replacing it. External transmission, 4:06 a.m. PSD. Northwest Biocommune 41A. Sequence ready for collection. Fruit has set. They came in hazmat suits, expecting a biohazard breach. Dr. Quinn Mayers led the containment team, 8 personnel, trained for biotech lab failure scenarios. Spore ruptures, viral mutations, unauthorized genetic drift. They had oxygen scrubbers, sealed boots, and autoclave gear. They'd received an anonymous signal from the garden's external beacon, believed long dead after the compound went radio silent 2 weeks prior. The last known occupants had been listed MIA, but the beacon's message was short. Systems stable, subject ready, come harvest. From the moment they stepped inside, things were wrong. The outer perimeter had changed. What once was clean, brutalist concrete had softened, walls gone pulpy, glass fogged from within. The facility breathed. They could feel it underfoot. And it was warm, too warm. Humidity levels were nearly 100%. But worse, there were no bodies, just clothing, suits, tools, tablets, as if the people inside had simply shed themselves. When they reached the greenhouse, one of the team vomited inside his mask. The fruiting bodies lined the walls now, not of plants, but of ex-people, their torsos hollowed, limbs softened and bent backward into flowering stalks. Faces still visible, some twitching. In the center stood the effigy, unrecognizable. It had grown 30 feet tall, its bark now smooth and skin-like, rippling with capillary motion. It pulsed, not like a tree, but a heart, and wrapped around its base, "Jesus Christ," whispered Mayers. A woman, naked, curled fetal, her body merged with the roots, but still breathing. Her spine was gone, replaced by an open vascular web that shimmered. Small blossoms unfurled from between her shoulder blades. Her mouth was parted. From it, a soft whisper drifted out, though her lips did not move. Rain, fire, soil, repeat. They scanned her. Melinda Vale, heart rate, stable. Brain activity, off scale. But the graft had taken over. She was no longer alone in her body. She was interface. Mayers hesitated. He reached toward her. She opened her eyes, green, glowing, unrecognizing. "You came to harvest?" she asked. "You're already part of it." Then her stomach began to move, not breathing, gestating. Her skin cracked along her abdomen, revealing a lattice of embedded nodes, each twitching in time with a new heartbeat. Beneath her body, the roots rippled outward. Dozens of pods began to rise from the soil like teeth breaking through gums. They pulsed. They smelled like home. One of the team members panicked and ran. He made it 30 feet before the floor opened and swallowed him, vines wrapping his face like a kiss. Mayers screamed. Melinda, or what remained of her, just smiled. "You're the seed now," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." 3 HOURs later, National Biosecurity Response Unit status. Containment lost. Satellite imaging showed the garden compound doubling in size every 6 hours. Root systems had breached aquifers. Fog laced with aerosolized spore matter was pushing east. At 11:13 a.m., a signal played across emergency radio bands, a woman's voice. Warm, familiar. "You are soft. That is good. It means you'll grow beautifully." Final scene. Beneath the surface, Melinda's last human thought flickered like a dying bulb. "I only came to find my brother." And then nothing human remained. Only the garden, and it was blooming everywhere. You made it back for now. But the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video. Subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.